Hello, good evening and welcome. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. I'm so excited to be here again with Inhale, Exhale, Feel Good Programming for Queers of Color, produced by Across Boundaries, curated by Rodney DeVerlis, and I am your host, Tanveer Alam. I'm just going to wait for our event to populate just a few moments. Um, just to share a bit about what you just heard, which is our new season jingle by Janssen Produced. You can check out more of his stuff at Janssen Produce on Instagram and on Spotify. He's amazing. He's a local Toronto, Scarborough born Sri Lankan Tamil rapper, musician, Carnatic musician, and does some really great stuff. And we're so excited to have had him on board to do our jingle this year. Today, we are super excited to be sharing a session that's really different for Inhale, Exhale. Actually, we haven't had a session like this yet in our history, but it really fed into our theme this year, which is body, mind, and spirit. And so all of our sessions this season have been curated towards yes, always being feel good, but also just centering on those key elements that I think all of us need to just give a bit more love these days. So we're really, really excited to have a special and new event today. And we have an excellent facilitator who I've had the chance to chat with before we hopped onto this Zoom, not Zoom, sorry. I'm just so used to saying Zoom, this Facebook Live situation. So I'm really, really excited with what they have to share with us today. But before we dig into that, I want to just take a moment to acknowledge the original caretakers of this land, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, and the Huron-Wendat peoples, who, for millennia, have been taking care of this land. And furthermore, I also want to acknowledge the many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples that continue to occupy and take care of this land. As a settler myself of first-generation immigrant settler parents, this line acknowledgement is very important to me because I also take into account the fact that my parents have also come from lands that still deal with the repercussions of a colonial world, and that kind of healing that they're still kind of trying to achieve is a healing that I'm also trying to achieve. And also I understand that through that, the way I occupy space on this land is something that I need to reconcile. And it's something that I need to continue doing research on. And I invite all of you to do your personal research because I do think that our connection to our land is deeply personal. And the acts and the kind of humanity that it requires to continue to occupy space on this land with respect is something that I really hope that all of us take the time and the effort to do our own personal research on. Inhale, exhale, deep breath in, deep breath out. I am so excited to now move on to presenting our facilitator, Sapphire Woods. Sapphire Woods, they, them, is a Black of Caribbean descent shapeshifter, gender nonconforming educator, Virgo sun and Aquarius moon who spends a lot of time relearning how to ingest and redistribute tenderness. That is something that we need so much of these days. So we're so glad that they're bringing some of that today. On most weekdays, you can find Sapphire in child's pose or talking to their granny on the phone. And let me tell you, that's practically my state these days as well. So couldn't be better suited for Inhale, Exhale. So without much further ado, I'm going to bring on Sapphire.
Good evening, everyone. I can't see who's out there, but if you are trickling in, there's only one requirement for this evening. And that requirement is to be in your ultimate comfiest situation, whether that's on the couch, if you're in bed with a blanket, whatever the case may be, you are required to be comfortable. So I'm going to give us about maybe a minute and a half max. I have water on deck. I've got Some tea. I just put in a little tea bag is on deck. So please grab yourself a drink, grab yourself a snack, whatever. We won't be here for too long, but this definitely is like a moment to relax and take a moment. So I'm gonna play a little jingle myself. It's the beginning of the track called Liftoff slash Mic Check by Robert Glasper and Shafiq Hussein. And yeah, use the washroom, take it in.
Oh yeah. Hello world. Peace and love. I wish you the best. And now for the next. Coming to your mind, live and direct from the ethers. Now it's all in your speakers, down to your sneakers. The great spotlight. Now as we prepare for our liftoff,
Okay,
you'll need only two things to direct your course.
so the theme is mind, body, soul. So first we got to get, you know, into I think our bodies first. So Tanvir had shown us or displayed what that was in the moment after our land acknowledgement. So maybe let's take some more an intentional breath together, and we'll open the space with a few words by Akweki Emezi in their latest book, Dear Senthren. The quote is on page 21, and I believe that words very much have the same power as any spell, and fitting with a literary inhale exhale session. I think that the most powerful writers know exactly how not just to spin a spell, but how to change something inside of our souls. So let's make space for those words to have the magic that I think we deserve to receive. And that happens with our breath. So let's inhale and exhale together. I feel like the first inhale always gets caught in my chest a little bit. So I'm going to try my next inhale and try and put my attention towards the bottom of my stomach. And maybe one more just to remind ourselves that we're actually fully here and present. If you were able to join me in whatever capacity, I appreciate it. So, this is a quote made up of a couple different lines in a paragraph on page 21 of Akweki Emezi's Der Senthren. It's not mirrored exactly, but there you go. There is no unfolding of a self without the space to do it in. The spell that I used to carry me from to the teaching helps me remember, helps me loop back into myself. I'll read it one more time. There is no unfolding of a self without the space to do it in. The spell that I used to carry me from to the teaching helps me remember, helps me loop back into myself. So let's come into ourselves. Sometimes I think there might be discourse or folks exchanging conversation around what it is to heal or do the work of healing. And I had a conversation with a really dear friend of mine last night, and that was a part of our conversation that also stuck with me. Um, this push, this drive, this pressure to heal, and it sounds like this labor, this hard work. But I think that we can afford ourselves some softness, and the softest humans in the world are often little humans, children, right? So today's book of choice that we're going to go through together isn't necessarily what I would call a children's book, more than it features children by way of pictures. Because I think pictures also can tell us a lot more or go deeper than just words alone. So I'm going to flip my camera and we're going to read through the story together as if maybe you were with a trusted adult, or you're bringing your inner child with you to come sit and you're going to read to them, just sitting on the floor, just taking a moment to indulge in something sweet. So let's do that in our imagination. Let's bring our inner children with us to explore ourselves. Okay, so I'm going to put you around maybe. Can I? Oh, maybe I can't. That's okay. I'm going to show you the pictures like adults do. Many Shapes of Clay, a story of healing, written and illustrated by Kenesha Sneed. Okay. This is Isha. You say it like Isha. And this is her cat who loves to take long naps. This is Isha's mom. She works in a small studio inside the basement of their apartment where she makes shapes from clay. Hmm. Tall shapes, small shapes, even bumpy, colorful shapes. Isha asks her mama why she doesn't play with the shapes. Why do you leave them on the shelves? It takes so much time and patience to make each shape, her mama explains. They are too fragile to play with. Mama slices off a chunk of clay like butter, then rolls it into a ball like dough and hands it to Isha. Isha, whoop, there we go. Isha stretches and smooths and rolls the cool clay in her hands. She doesn't know what she'll make today. Maybe I'll make a two-headed lizard with polka dots, she thinks to herself. Pretty cute. One shape in particular makes Isha very happy. It reminds her of the day last summer when she and Papa picked a handful of lemons. She paints her shape the same bright yellow. What a beautiful picture. All this hard work deserves a pause, Mama says. How about some fresh air? Sweat drips from the top of her head to the tip of her chin. Mama misses Papa a lot. See the little tear at the side? Outside, there you go. Outside, a summer breeze rushes through the neighborhood trees while the sun slowly sinks behind the buildings. Isha sits on the stoop and plays with her yellow shape. The whole neighborhood seems to be taking a pause, except for Miss Harrington from the flower market. She rides past with a backpack full of lavender. She waves at Isha as a sprig of lavender falls out of her backpack and floats down the sidewalk. Isha wonders if Miss Harrington will notice the missing sprig when she gets home. And if she does, will she feel sad about it? As Isha sits on the stoop, she imagines so many things she could do with her shape. Maybe we'll go to the beach someday, Isha says to herself. The sound of the ocean hugging the shore as water cooled her toes would feel so good. You can see Isha cooling her toes with her shape. There we go. The rumble of a skateboard interrupts Isha's daydream. She looks down at her shape. It is less yellow now, like the color of a lemon that's lost its taste and not as soft. The skateboard guy. But that's okay because now it makes music when Isha taps it with her fingers. Tap, tap, tap. Isha taps her clay. Tap, tap, crack. Oh no. Oh no. Do y'all see that? All these pieces. Isha's shape has broken into many shapes on the ground. Each piece reflects the sadness she feels. Mm. Isha tries to think of ways to put the pieces back together. Tape wouldn't last very long. And glue always sticks to the wrong things. What Isha feels is hard to describe, like something that is too heavy to lift, like something that might last forever. The sunlight is fading, and the breeze has stopped blowing through the trees. Isha's eyes fill with tears as she looks down at all the broken pieces. What happened? Asked Mama, as she scoops Isha up into her lap. Gave my shape so much time and patience, but now it's in pieces, Isha says. It's okay to feel sad about those broken pieces, Mama says. There are times, many times, when we lose the things we love. Mama somehow knows what Isha is feeling. I never knew she could feel the same feelings, Isha thinks, and hugs her mama close. You see that picture? Take it in. Don't worry, we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. Awesome illustration. Together, they pick up the broken pieces and walked past the shapes on Mama's shelves, stepping over the last step where the cat purrs, sound asleep. You can't always fix what's broken, but you can always try, Mama says as she pulls out a small box from under her bed. Hmm. Inside are spindles of twine in different colors and textures. See that? Slowly, with patience and care, Mama and Isha connect all the broken pieces together by looping twine around each one until there is only one piece, one piece left. Maybe, oops, maybe I can make it into something new tomorrow, Isha thinks out loud. What a wonderful idea, Mama says, gazing at Isha with a warm smile. Now, let's wash up and see what we can come up with for dinner. See the picture of Isha's papa and the sprig of lavender. The end. Beautiful. Oh, that was Many Shapes of Clay, a story of healing, written and illustrated by Kenesha Sneed. And, before what I love about story time is that before you end off, the best part is talking about how you feel. So I have a couple things that for me stood out when I read the story, and I want to share some of them with you. So the first time I saw this book, I was mostly attracted to the fact that it was about like ceramics and clay and like tactile things. And then seeing this image on the front of these two working together, like this is such an endearing image. And I wanted to go deeper into that. On my in my bio that was advertised, there's a line there that does address healing from family wounds. And I know as queers of color, not all of us, dare I say, it's common amongst our communities, our varying communities, that not all of us may have the best connections or relationships to folks that maybe raised us or were responsible for us or we felt were responsible for us. And so there's a lot of reparenting we have to do, not just as young people growing older, but also queer folks of color that are healing more than just ourselves, but our generations before us. So, what does that look like often, and where do we get our instructions from to do this generational healing? Uh, and I mean, I don't have an answer, unfortunately, but I think this book, I know the first time I read this book, I bawled, I cried. I was so moved by this tenderness and so moved by the imagery of taking a smaller version of maybe oneself metaphorically or just in the story alone, the child with her mom feeling this disappointment, feeling dare I say heartbreak, and maybe connecting for the first time the way how the little girl felt with how her mom might feel, and how that connects to a lot of to a memory in particular. So these were my thoughts that I was reflecting on that I wrote down. What do the shapes represent? So the story is called Many Shapes of Clay, right? For me, my metaphor is they represent different versions of ourselves. Or at least that's how my reading was. I feel like, especially as a trans person, I have shape shifted literally and figuratively. And I think that's something a lot of people can relate to, especially just being queer as an umbrella, shifting through different versions of ourselves, different iterations. Um, and sometimes those iterations sit on the shelf, right? They're fully formed versions or iterations. Something that's fully formed for me is um, an educator or someone who loves books and loves reading. Um, those are versions of me that I've fine tuned, and they sit on shelves, these forms. And then there are other versions of me that I thought were long lasting, but they had to be remolded or broken and reconfigured again. So I wonder what that is for you. Do you think that maybe this story could be a metaphor for different versions and shapes that you take on as an individual? Hmm. But the thing about these shapes is that you still want to play with them. If we're taking this metaphor further, we are making these versions of ourselves, and they're so beautiful, they're so different, they're so interesting and unique. And sometimes they just stay there. But sometimes we want to take some shapes off and play with them and see what happens. I know I sometimes live my life that way, and I think it's fun to live life that way, honestly, just seeing what you can do with different shapes. Uh, but like these shapes, inevitably, they are sensitive or they're fragile or breakable, liable to break, I should say, not breakable, but liable to break just because of its nature. It's a clay thing, right? So, what do we do when these versions of us break or shatter in really like hurtful and unexpected, or in ways that make us feel hurt, or ways that give us a moment of grieving? Are there versions of us that we are grieving? I know for me, there's different versions of myself that grieves, different versions of me that I imagined in the future, the same way Isha was imagining her and her shape sitting there together at the beach, their toes cooling. It's like this cute little like moment that she was really imagining and looking forward to. Are there versions of ourselves that we imagine inside of the future, and you know with circumstances outside of our control, sometimes do we get disappointed and have to mourn different versions of ourselves that broke? Or maybe if you don't like that language of breaking, that maybe were mishandled or underwent tarnishing in some sort of way. I think there's space to grieve when that happens, right? I think something else that was awesome about the fact that, if we're taking this as a metaphor again, uh, these shapes of clay. I love the clay imagery because it does give you it's a medium that gives you full license to create. And I like that when you're creating with clay, at least when I was in like summer camp, when I was younger, I had the privilege of being able to play with ceramics and clay. And you get the slab of clay and it's formless, it's like nothing, and then you can make up whatever you want. Or some people that do ceramics on a wheel or do like wheel throwing, I think it's called. It's how I've heard people talk about this experience is um, finding out what the clay wants to say and helping it come out into its own shape. Oh, I love that imagery so much. And I feel like some of us are able to do that. Some of us make these creative versions of ourselves out of our form. And it's so amazing. So I wanted to also just name that as like a celebratory thing. We don't always have to make things in fear of them breaking. Sometimes that's the furthest thing from our mind. When you're making a pottery piece, you're not thinking about, oh, as soon as I put this in the kiln, it may or may not smash. You're in the moment. You're feeling the clay. You're in touch with your senses. You're interested in the final form. You're curious. And I think that's, almost like a childlike or an innocent spirit that I think no matter how old we get, uh, that's something that we can harness, or no, not harness. That's something that we can call in and rekindle and sit next to all the time as much as we want, especially being queer. That's our specialty. um, and then a little bit deeper inside of these shapes, I thought it was interesting that, some shapes are bumpy, some shapes are tall, and some shapes remind us of things. Isha's shape reminded her of these moments that she had with her father. And we can only infer, kind of through how we saw the mother. Well, we'll get into that in a second, but, we see just the mom and the child, or the parent and the child. And there's like this memory. And so we're inferring that this memory is because, for one reason or another, um, the father's no longer there and he's very much missed. Maybe assuming that maybe there was a passing, and these two are figuring out a way to move forward with tenderness with each other, while holding different experiences of grief over the same event. So some shapes that we take on are from memories. I'm trying to think if there's ever been a moment in my lives before that have translated, and I think this clay imagery. So I was raised in a religious household, like Christian uh, household, and there's always like this biblical esque metaphor that is used all the time around uh, like God being the clay master and we are the clay, and He forms us in His image. And as much as I don't subscribe to the beliefs that I was raised to believe in, there's a way in which the principle of the thing still remains. I am my own creator, and I create myself in whatever image, but I'm human to some degree. And there are some creations or self iterations that I've made that very much um, are influenced by past versions or past things that I've learned about the world and about myself or about others. So putting that out there as well. Maybe some of the shapes that we take on are influenced by our memories. Um, and I also wanted to kind of talk about this image, and I'll pull up the image again. Pull up the image. Am I okay? I'm going to show you the image in this tangible book. This image of the mom here. Do you remember this? And it says, all this hard work deserves a pause. How about some fresh air? Sweat drips down from the top of her head to the tip of her chin. Mama misses Papa too. What did you make of that? And unfortunately, I can't see comments, how it's being displayed right now, which is okay. But if you if you're able to communicate with peers that are also listening in, definitely feel free to answer. What do we make of that moment? For me, I was interpreting this moment of almost that exterior, again, loving a good metaphor. This maybe the adult exteriors in front of us that sometimes maybe have trouble with um, acknowledging our vulnerability or engaging with our vulnerability in forthcoming ways, which is to say, sometimes it's hard for us to show how we really feel. Because I don't know, the pain is so deep, you don't know if you're going to be held in a way that you need to be held as an adult. Um, but your mourning thing, so I just thought it was interesting. Sweat drips from the top of her head to the tip of her chin, and there's still this inference that there's sadness there. Yes, it's sweat, but there's the image almost has us believing that it's not sweat, that it might be a tear, right? So I thought that was an interesting part of this, how Kenesha Sneed, the author, how Kenesha Sneed um, gives us that nuance, or allows allows a struggle for vulnerability to be part of the story. sometimes it's hard to feel the hard feelings. Sometimes it's hard to grieve outwardly. I mean, we're still in a pandemic. A lot of us, especially if we are at the intersections of ability, and different health status, and how that plays into isolation, there's so much that we've all grieved. Even just with life being life the way that it is, grieving is, I don't know, grieving has taken on a whole new shape, so to speak, right? So how do we grieve? How do we handle these emotions if grieving is not in the arms of others? And sometimes some of us need the arms of others to help us move through some grief, and that's not available for some of us. So I liked that part, because I think it's important to also understand that not everyone um, has, I don't want to say the luxury of grieving, but also the luxury of grieving in some regards, um, in forthcoming ways. Some of us have to grieve in more abstract or like silent ways. And there's space for that. There's definitely still space for that. Um, and then what else? There's a lot about like detachment. This that the part in the story. Hold on, I'll pull it up. I will show us again. I'll remind us again with Miss Harrington. When Miss Harrington is on the bike and the sprig of lavender falls off, and Isha wonders in the story. She wonders if Miss Harrington will notice the missing sprig when she gets home, and if she does, will she feel sad about it? I think this part is also significant or profound in its own way, because I think it does speak to what does it mean to grieve. To grieve is to have to let go of something, you know? To someone else, it might be, oh, it's just a sprig of lavender. No one's going to miss that. But if these are, things that you've worked for, or parts of yourself that you saw differently and that you have to let go of, that can be, it could be easy for some, and it could be troubling for others. And I liked that nuance as well. Will she feel sad about it? Will she notice it missing when she gets home? Have you ever woken up one day and been like, I feel like I'm different now? Or maybe you go away for a trip, or you spend a weekend away from your normal environment, and you come back to your normal environment and you're like, there's a shift. I don't see things the same way anymore. Or you're in a conversation with someone after you had a life-changing experience, and you're revisiting a subject and you're like, I don't think like this anymore. Sometimes change just happens. Sometimes it's less about molding yourself into a thing, and sometimes we just become, you know? And in sometimes just becoming, sometimes we shed things without necessarily realizing that we've become different in this future, which I also think is kind of cool. That some of the things that we lose or shed, or um, maybe they fall off our backpacks in some regards, uh, aren't necessarily, so big of a deal in a regard. And then I guess the biggest theme, let me have a sip of water here. The biggest theme, of course, was this imagery of parent and child, which we kind of talked about earlier. But I did want to re-acknowledge again that reparenting looks so many different ways. Again, I don't have the answer to what reparenting looks like. I'm kind of just like seeing how it goes myself. But there's this imagery of holding, being able to sit with your inner child, not make ourselves work to heal all the time, but just sitting and being like we are right now. What's another image that really spoke to me? This image also spoke to me. You see that? Yeah. After after the big break happens, Isha's shape breaks, and they're figuring out, how can we put this together? How can we put this together? How can we fix this? How can we make this okay? There's no making the shape again. So what do we do next? And I like that in the story, the parent isn't saying, it doesn't matter. You'll get a new shape later. You'll be fine. I like that the parent is sitting with the child. And again, in this theme of reparenting, being able to sit and say, okay, what are some creative ways we can recreate what is broken or what has broken? And so there's like this, there's still a sense of creation there with the different colors, sizes, and textures of twine that Isha uses to create a necklace. It's not even it's a shape, but it's also a different function altogether, right? I love that. And then even after that too, there's a comment that says, until there was only one shape left. And I was curious what that meant. And I was trying to look at the picture again and see if the shape ended up somewhere else. And I didn't see it. So I wondered the significance of this one last piece left. And the only thing I could come up with is maybe there are some things that break and you do nothing about it. Maybe they're just to a degree or to a certain level, or just because there isn't a need for it. Sometimes things break and they're just broken, and that's okay. They can exist like that. So I think with all of that, to close, what I thought was on purpose, Kenesha Sneed is an amazing writer. And this story is so powerful. I love that even though the main imagery here was about clay and reparenting and creating together, or co-creating, I should say, at the end, it's about, so what can we come up with for dinner? And I feel like that, especially being from Black and Brown Indigenous backgrounds, this is our audience right now, that food is such an essential part of the ways that we love on each other, the ways that we build community with each other, the ways that we remember things and create new memories. I love that food is a part of that, or like the segue into what's next. And I just want to, remind folks, like, especially when things feel broken, I feel like some of us have a tendency to have to be vulnerable to our eating and our nourishment being impacted. And I think, there's a direct correlation between food, our relationship to food, and our healing and our liberation, and the compassion we have towards ourselves. So also a reminder, if you haven't eaten something in the last little bit, like, eat something. Remind yourself that you're worthy of nourishing, even if you're not in your final form or this perfect form yet. If you're working through being broken or being broken into, or fixing and mending things that have broken, feed yourself, nourish yourself, because you are not a piece of clay. You're a very precious human being, a baby little queer that deserves infinite amounts of holding and cherishing. And that, friends, is all I have for today. We read Many Shapes of Clay, A Story of Healing by Kenesha Sneed. And thank you for joining me this evening.
Wow. Thank you so, so, so much, Sapphire. That was stunning. I mean, the book in itself is stunning. The drawings are beautiful and evocative and tender and homely. There's just this kind of like sense of like homeliness to them. It's really, really, um, and I think what was so beautiful about what you offered us today is that you really like. I think from like your intro to like the book you shared to like how we debriefed. Like I think it just feels so holistic. I feel like I've like I had to take a bunch of notes while I was just like listening to you read through the book and like listening to you talk about it. And um yeah, I just have some thoughts that like I feel like I want to share with you and like maybe talk about for a little bit if you're into that. Cool. So like from the very top with the quote, there's this one phrase, and I correct me if I misheard. The teachings help me loop back into myself. And the minute I heard it, I just felt like I think that phrase is so potent in the time that we're in right now, and also just in general for humanity. And I think for folks that are looking at, um, we're in this. I think we're in this place, at least for myself, where I think I'm looking at new ways of learning and new ways of acquiring warmth and goodness and like something that feels good for myself. And I think this idea of like teaching that can either be, like aggressive, if you will, or soft, or just with a slight push, or even, just kind of like matter of fact. This is a teaching. I'm proposing this to you, and this idea of whether, regardless of it holding any kind of connotation, the fact that it will loop back into you and in some respect, in some way, I think is really, really powerful. Because and that's true for what your table manners are, to like how you how if you decide to take your hat off when you enter a room, or you keep it on, or if you you know um sit down with a glass of water, or you have water after you have dinner, like. And I think that's so interesting. And I'm using like really like banal, like like examples, but it made me think about all of those things, which I thought was really, really. I thought that was a really powerful phrase. So if you would want to talk a bit more about that, I would be so down to hear you talk about it.
So in talking about the little things that loop back into us, yeah, I and you said banal, and I wanted to make my face be like, no, like don't, because it is the small things. I think that inside of in yeah, I think engaging inside of like a virtual and digital world, being able to realize like we have to hold on to these little things. It's not about grand gestures and being on display all the time. And so I think that there's a way in which, like, when we're not watching ourselves and each other, it is the little things and the little habits that feed into um, the way that we engage with ourselves and each other. And I do think in those smaller actions, we are able to build like again, new memories, ways of tenderness, way, because how can you give tenderness if you haven't taken the time to be tender? Like, tender maybe looks like I started off with the alarm on my phone being like not the one that's like, hi, you know what I mean? And it's more like, you can get up a little bit. Say, yeah, you know what I mean? It is the little things. And then you're going into your next conversation, maybe with that ringtone in your head of like, I'm not pushing, I'm just coming into my day, you know?
Absolutely, yeah, I completely agree with you. And then now going into the book that you offered us, I think from the get go, like just like the amount of imagery that the book offers, and like both visually and through the words, and there's such like I feel like the words are so um, like intelligently picked in their simplicity, but also their depth, and how much cultural connotation they can hold. Um, One thing that struck me from the very beginning was this comparison to clay to butter and dough, and this like evocation of like texture, taste, scent. This like evocation of something that takes time to create, something that takes labor, something that takes softness, because you can't like rub it in, like you can't just like go in at the dough or the butter, like this kind of like this notion that these things require time, and that they're evoking a variety of senses within you, and that they're also like a community or a family experience. So that's something that like struck me the minute I heard that those three comparisons. um and then I think what you brought up, yeah, honestly. And then like what you brought up, which I also wrote down, like all this hard work deserves a pause. I was like, yep, that's it. That's the phrase. Like that's it. And like and then how that like then led into like the whole neighborhood taking a pause. And I was like, oh, like there's this like remembrance of like even as a community, we need to just like we need to ground, which I thought was really, really special. And then just like the like generals, and which you touched upon, the general sentiments around like missing somebody and sadness and loss, whether that be the lavender or that be or like this kind of like processing of a young individual's like, how is this grief different from my mother's grief, or how is this grief similar to my mother's grief, or are they at the same degree, what the barometer of those two things are. And I think that was like again like that kind of like subtle like indication to like, yeah, like how does a child understand grief? How do they understand the severity or the depth of it, um, in the kind of simple world that they're kind of experiencing that is already so heavy with small things, you know? So that's something that struck me. And then I think like this like idea of like, um, yeah, like again, like this like you brought it up, like brokenness and putting things back together, but then also like how does something coalesce or like come back together while still being broken? Like what is that paradox, like how is a necklace built from pieces of, like or like whether it be that, or like how are relationships mended even if there are flaws to them, right? So that's something that crossed my mind. And then like, and in relation to that, like this whole like the whole book and this presence of like ephemerality and foreverness, like both of those things and how they're both held together, whether that be somebody who's lost in your life or somebody who you remember forever, even if they're no longer there in spirit, like they're no longer there in like, and but they're there in spirit, those kinds of things. And then how like also that shapes, yes, are broken, but shapes are also moldable. So they're like, they're tender, they're soft, they're adjustable. Like we have, like if we allow it for ourselves, we have the space to hold that and to like be like, no, this doesn't have to exist in this way. Healing doesn't have to look like this one thing. Healing can also, like be malleable. Um, yeah, that kind of thinking. And then the last thought that I had as I was listening to you speak was, in relation to like the piece that wasn't worked with, and like some things that break also just need more time, and maybe you're not ready to address that in this moment. Maybe it's something that you'll think about in 3 years, in 4 years, or never. But the freedom to give yourself that, and sometimes you need to remember why something broke also, or why something no longer works, even if breaking is not the right word, but something no longer fits in the same way that it used to, right? So yeah, these are just thoughts that like came to me as I was listening to you, as I was listening to you talk about it. So yeah, if you want to share anything in relation to that, I'm sure our viewers would be happy to hear, but or just me at this point, because I'm just having a ball today. But yeah, thank you so much for the sharing.
I'm just also so appreciative to also get to hear your reflections and what you picked out of the story, because I got to then learn more. It went deeper for me, and it made me also think about, yeah, it's not just about shaping oneself, but also our relationship to others, and not just others relationally, but our environment, and how these, like that pause in the neighborhood wasn't something that I had picked up before. And I really like now have a different appreciation, or like an added appreciation for that moment, and what it means to be soft and take care, and how that can echo, and why it echoes in the first place. I think that was very profound, and again, relationally. So as you were talking, I was thinking about that image of the twine being put together in the string, and um, I know that I could be quite an idealist, and so so if a relationship or a connection isn't working in a particular way, I used to come from a place of like deep heartbreak, this thing is broken, like we will never fit, like this sucks. And in becoming more, or leaning into my malleability, realizing maybe just some twine, maybe there is space in between these broken pieces, but it actually creates a whole new thing altogether. And that's so, I think, necessary for our collective survival, is to figure out what are these, right? What are these ways that we can reconfigure without discarding, right? Situationally, like, again, we can't take one whole metaphor and apply it to everything, but I think in when we are soft and when we are sitting together to think about things, I think that changes the way that we're able to co-create. We're thinking about, again, relationally, thinking about co-creation and thinking about the image of the parent and the child sitting together and being like, here's the twine, here are the broken pieces, what do we want to do with that? And I think that's the how in making those things happen. If you can have both parties, or yeah, let's say both parties do that, and then thinking about loss as well. Yeah, that can also complicate things, like how to put together disjointed memories, or maybe complicated relationships, right? I know, like, maybe a lot of us have that in our histories too, complicated relationships with self and family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, our communities, whatever. How does that twine feel metaphorical when it comes to those relationships as well? And just leaving space for that. Thank you so much for your reflections, Tanvir. So beautiful.
I'm so happy. Thank you so much. I feel like this would go on and on forever, but we're at the end of our time, and I'm again so thankful. We're deeply grateful to have had you this season. You offered something that was so special, so different, and I just think it's going to open up a whole Pandora's box of feelings, of emotions, of thinking. So thank you so much for your offering today. This was Inhale, Exhale book reading with Sapphire Woods. For folks that are going to be watching later, this video will be on our Facebook page for you to catch up on later. Next week is our last session of Inhale Exhale, December 14th, 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. We have a burlesque variety show with some very special guest stars. So please make sure to sign up for that at Across Boundaries website. I'm Tanvir Alam. Have a great night, and we will see you next time. Thank you.